Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh.
Professor Hussainmiya, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to TASMiNA's Horizon program. I am Nuha Nazar, an undergraduate student from Queens College, New York. We have a lot to cover in this interview with your rich and diverse personal background. To start off, I'd like to ask you about your family background and your youth experiences that contributed to your success in your educational achievements.
Well, I was born in a, lower middle class family. I was born and raised in one of the wards of Colombo, the capital city, and I'm one of the baby boomers born just after the war. And when we were born, my area in Colombo was not very well-developed area. We had only one school there. But unlike today, that area is very expansive, geographically placed territory, whereby it had a very large coconut plantation. Why I am mentioning that is, I had to cross from my house to the school through the coconut plantation. And that coconut area became our playground. And more importantly, it is where I spend most of my time with my colleagues and playmates, doing various kind of activities and sports. And also I used to read my books in the valley of grass lying there. So when you talk about my birth, that is one thing I would like to emphasize, that I was born in a ward, Maligawatha ward, which today has become a very densely populated area, unlike the time I was born.
Well, that's great. Thank you. A follow-up question would be what's one major circumstance from your youth that you'd be able to say helped you reach the position that you're in right now?
Well, for some reason, in my area, which was actually populated somewhat by not so comfortable people, meaning that the people were mostly shopkeepers, people who work in the city as peons and salesmen, and other people were fishermen who sells fish and having small shops. So it's not a very rich area compared to other wards of Colombo. So coming from such a rather backward area, the student population were not very diligent. Even if there was a school, the students go there and they finish up the education rather early, say 5th standard, 6th standard, and they started to work somewhere to sustain their families. In my case, for some reason, I had some kind of intelligence in me. As a result, I was very well motivated. When I went to school, my teachers paid quite a lot of attention to me because of my maybe energy and interest. And to answer your question, that changed my life was that when I was in the 3rd standard, 1, 2, 3, I was given double promotion by one of my teachers to go to the 5th standard. On the 5th standard, there is a government exam called competitive exam for 5th standard government scholarship. If you get selected to that, you can go to some other high school of your choice to do science and higher studies. Plus, the government gives you a kind of allowance, a monthly allowance. This is a very competitive stuff. And today, whole Sri Lankan student population in the 5th standard, and the parents are very keen that their students pass this exam in order to improve their further education. So this is what happened to me. I passed that exam. And I became a 5th standard government scholar. But Fifth standard government scholar mean when you pass that you will be sent to the major schools in Sri Lanka, like central schools, where you get a lot of science education being conducted. In my case, I was taught in the Tamil medium, and therefore I had to look for school where science is taught in Tamil, which is only available at that time in Jaffna area. Whereas I am coming from Colombo. To go to Jaffna, it takes you you have to go around 280 miles, and you have to be boarded there. Unfortunately, my parents couldn't afford that education to me. Although you get a government scholarship, the rest of the expenses had to be borne by the parents. So my only choice was to go from Maligavatta, where I was born, to the next ward called Maradana, where they had was a central college. Maradana Central School, very famous. Now it is known as Sri Sangaraja Mahavidyalaya. That time they had a Tamil medium where I could join. But unfortunately, there was no good science education there. There was only one school, Mrs. Kumara Velo somebody. She was only teacher available. And I thought it was not in my interest to follow science in those circumstances. So I was able to choose my own path and career and what should be best for me. So from the time of my, say, I was 12, 13 years of age, I carved out for myself a career, I would say. And I was very interested in history per se, history as such.
Hello.
And that's how the change happened. Today, you treat me as a historian. So that is where it all started. Started with the fifth standard government exam. And then finally, it led me to this position. We can talk about it later, yes.
Yeah. Well, it was very nice to hear about your family and your youth. Next, I would like to ask you about your early education at Denham English School, now known as Darussalam Mahavidyalaya in Maligawate. It looks like you did well in your studies from the beginning of your early education, up to the level of going to Monash University in Australia. Could you please explain your success in higher education up to obtaining a Ph.D.?
Yes. Now you are going back to my school again. As I told you, it's a kind of village type of school. You did not have classes above junior standard, that is Form 3 or 8th standard. And that school, when I joined the school, they changed the medium of instruction from English to Tamil. So as I told you, I was admitted in the Tamil medium school. And the school is not well equipped, meaning that it's a very large hall divided into various partition area, and classes are held adjoining to each other. And from one class, you can hear what the other class teachers are teaching. But despite all those difficulties, my school was fortunate to have very nice teachers at that time. I had particularly two great teachers called Mrs. Rajadurai, Jaffna Tamil lady. She took personal care of me, my education. And then at that second level, before my promotion, I was taught by one Maulavi Mukhtar Muhammad, and I'm still owe a great debt of gratitude to him, because he instilled in me the importance of reading. He used to promote various Tamil magazines where children should learn, study, like Kumudam, Ananda Vigadan. And I got so interested in the reading habit at that time. And my school also had a small library. I was one student, used to borrow all those little books and go and read it. So basically, I was a student with interested in reading. So much so, I used to win the school prizes. Every year we have a school prize award ceremony for good students. And I used to win about 3-4 book prizes. And those books also, I go and read it. So basically, although it's not a great school, I made use of the school through my diligence and support from my teachers.
Wow, that's great. Professor Hussainmiya, after graduation in 1968, you started your profession as a tutor at the University of Ceylon, Peradeniya, Sri Lanka, and went on to a different level of teaching in Sri Lanka as well as abroad. You are also an associate professor at the University of Brunei Darussalam. I believe this was a game-changing moment in your life. Do you agree? And would you explain your teaching experiences?
Yeah, just before the teaching experience, there is a small gap here. After, when I entered that Mardana Central School, I was the only Tamil medium student ever entered the University of Sri Lanka, or University of Ceylon at that time, to study in the arts faculty. I would like to emphasize this particular point. In the university entrance exam held in 1963, which is accompanied by higher school certificate, HSC, island-wide, I scored very high marks in the university entrance exam. I became actually number 2 person in the island. The number 1 person who won the award was Mr. G.L. Piris, the former Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka. So G.L. Piris was number 1 and I was number 2 in the whole island capacity. And therefore, in the university as well in Peradeniya when I entered, both Professor G.L. Piris and I got university scholarships. It is an honorary scholarship, which is very prestigious. And that is one of the achievements I would like to count. And from there onwards, I did very well in my degree level. I did my first degree in Bachelor of Education, where, again, I wish to emphasize that I was the only candidate out of 43 candidates, both in Sinhala and Tamil medium, to obtain a second-class subdivision, and I was number 1 in the list. Not only number 1, I was only candidate to obtain an upper second degree at that level, and that was, I consider, as a little bit of achievement. Having done that, I became a tutor in education in Peradeniya. Then in 2 years' time, I had an offer to obtain another degree, honors degree in history, which was my favorite subject for many reasons which I cannot explain here. I could not pursue history at the first shy in Peradeniya. So second time, when I became a tutor in education, the university made a special offer to make me to resit the examination as history honor student, which I did. And again, I got a very good class in that. And that entitled me for the university to appoint me as an assistant lecturer in history. That is how my lecturer career started. While doing history, I also sat for some government exam like Sri Lanka Civil Service, that time known as Ceylon Administrative Service or CAS. There too, I became number 1 in the island. And I was offered a civil service job, which I rejected because my interest was in the Sri Lanka Overseas Service, where I will be sent as first officers or ambassadors later. For unfortunately, during that year, 1972, that civil overseas service, government has abolished it. And I was only able to join the Ceylon Administrative Service. So I thought to join university service was much better given my interest in learning and education. And that was how I ended up in teaching history at Peradeniya University. So there only, when I was doing that history teaching, I was able to locate a scholarship offered by Australian Monash University. And there I was given a full scholarship by the Monash University under the guidance of one Professor Cyril Skinner, who was then chair of the Indonesian and Malay Studies Department. When I made my application, he came to know from my CV that I am a Sri Lankan born Malay. And at the same time, I had a good knowledge of Tamil. This professor was very keen to understand how the Tamil language and Malay culture was linked. He himself was doing some personal research about some manuscripts brought from India and how it has influenced the Malay literary culture in Malaysia. So he, having found that I, being a Malay and a Tamil scholar, thought I would be an ideal candidate to pursue research in this level, and therefore it was easy for him to fix a full scholarship for me, and that is what that took me to Monash University from Peradeniya. So that year was 1974. From 1974 to 1978, I was attached to Indonesian Malay Studies Department of Monash University as a Ph.D. student, during which time I made very startling discoveries of new existing literature and a culture. I will talk to you in detail later.
Yeah, like as you said before, you were a researcher and you discovered more than 150 original Malay manuscripts in Sri Lanka in 1974. How was this a fundamental change in your career as an international scholar?
Yes, when I went to Australia, Monash University, I did not know anything about that existing. I was interested to study about one particular Sri Lankan newspaper called Alamat Lankapuri. I took a small microfilm copy of it for a sample. I couldn't read that Alamat Lankapuri. So when I showed it to my professor, he was so excited about it, that existence of a Malay newspaper in Sri Lanka. But Sri Lanka is not a Malay country. Sri Lanka is a Sinhalese country where Muslims and Malays were living. Whereas Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, they all belong to one Malay world in Brunei. So he was so surprising. He asked me whether I would like to go back to Sri Lanka to do further research on this subject. And then he put me through an important course to study Jawi. Jawi means Arabic written in Malay, Malay written in Arabic language. It's called Jawi. So I underwent a course. Within 3 months, I was able to read Jawi because I could read Arabic Tamil. Arabic Tamil is Tamil written in Arabic, and quite a number of Sri Lankan Muslims of old age were adept in reading that, and I'm one of them. With that knowledge, I could also easily read Arabic Malay because I knew my Malay. So my professor was very impressed with my progress in learning Jawi, and then I got a field trip from my university to visit Sri Lanka. So when I went to Sri Lanka, when I visited Sri Lanka, accidentally, I came across the existence of a large coterie of Malay Jawi literature in Sri Lanka. I was able to meet few people, old people, in their homes to read their manuscripts. And fortunately, unfortunately, people whom they opened up for me could not read a single text. They kept it as one of their prestige value. And they didn't know what to do with those texts. And some of these texts are in the trunks and some old cupboards, which, as you know, the younger generation were not interested. They wanted to deprive them of the older people to that space, and they wanted the space for their purposes. So these people, the older people who had this text, they would not have parted with anything. When I appeared on the scene, when I was able to read them, they were very, very happy to see one of their clan, a Malay boy, a young fellow, a scholar, has come to Sri Lanka to study them. And they were very happy to pass them to me. Not just to me, I took with me the support of the Sri Lanka National Archives. And the Sri Lanka National Archives sent a special officer with me to go and collect those manuscripts. So I was able to catalog them, list them, limit them, and brought most of this text back to the Sri Lanka National Archives, where we microfilmed each and every manuscript for progeny. And we made copies of them. And the microfilms are still in the National Archives. And when we tried to return the manuscripts, some of the old people said, Tuan, meaning sir, since you are the expert, it is best you keep this for further research. We are very happy to give you this kind. And the manuscript exchanged hands at that stage. Half of the manuscript were left in the Sri Lanka National Archives. So after the manuscript, which I got interested, they gave it to me. Of course, in some areas, I had to give money to them, and I got some receipts from them. And they were very happy about it, so that the area got cleared. So their children got their trunk boxes and their almiras free. So somebody else taken their, their stuff out. It just happened that way. So that's a story. Okay, that is physical part of it. But the things which I discovered, so the so-called Malay manuscripts, was a khazana or treasure trove of knowledge. Knowledge in the sense, it represented the knowledge that time in vogue in the other serious Malay world like Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, Singapore. And my discovery proved to my department, Indonesian Malay Studies, that Sri Lanka is also now can take part in that milieu or in that share of the knowledge and the share of culture. So when I brought out this manuscript, which are copies of which can be found even in the Malay world, that extended the boundaries of Malay cultural and literary world back to Sri Lanka. So much so, in the later years, Sri Lanka emerged to be another part of the Malay world. And I will come to that point later. I was invited to Malaysia, therefore, to attend various conferences to promote the study of Malay literary culture and the society in Sri Lanka back in Malaysia in 1982. And one of the occasions was when the Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad had just come to as a Prime Minister. It was in the Malacca. Second Malay World Symposium was held there. And I was invited to the stage to meet him. And I was able to offer one of the manuscripts to him as a personal donation, which really hit the headlines of Malaysia. And I became somewhat popular in Malaysia as a Malay scholar from Sri Lanka. And so much so, that particular conference led to hold another second Malay World Symposium in Sri Lanka, organized by me and the Malay Literary Association, GAPENA. And who was the chief guest for that? Sri Lankan President J.R. Jayawardena. He was very happy to have the World Malay Conference to be held in Sri Lanka. And he congratulated me for the awareness I brought for both the Sri Lankan Malays and to Sri Lanka as part of the larger Malay world. So that is the story.
Wow, that's very impressive. Do you recognize that these two incidences were a lifetime memorable contribution towards the Malay community in Sri Lanka?
Yes, it has really opened a great vista. I'll tell you one. I was invited through my discoveries after the world conferences. I was invited as a visiting professor in the Institute of Malay Language, Literature and Culture at the National University of Malaysia, which is called UKM, University Kebangsaan Malaysia. I spent there almost 2 years, during which period I produced 2 books. One was called The Lost Cousins. The Lost Cousins mean the Malays were the lost cousins of the Malaysians and Indonesians. Second book I produced was Orang Regiment, the Sri Lanka Malay Regiment. Both books opened a big area of research for the world. And both books became very seminal works on the Malay society of Sri Lanka. First of all, I was able to open up the history of Malays proper. It is not simply the history of Malays, but it is their society, culture, and the interaction with the other communities in Sri Lanka. And for which reason, I have spent quite a lot of time in the World Archives. As I told you, I was in Monash University from 1974 to 78. I spent almost 9 months or 1 year under the patronage of the university to visit Netherlands and also England to go to the public record office and to look for military records, where I collected quite a lot of military records pertinent to Sri Lankan Malay Regiment, which was known as Ceylon Rifle Regiment. Similarly, when I came to Sri Lanka, there too I spent quite a lot of research in the Sri Lankan National Archives. I went through the Dutch records and the British records, military service records, colonial records, and the governor's records, namely Sri Lanka National Archives, Lot 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And it was a very timely work, and it was a lot of love of labor. You had to spend from morning, say 8 o'clock until about 4 o'clock, sitting in one place, looking at the old documents, one after the other. And I was very able to collect quite a lot of very important facts and figures about the arrivals of the Malays in Sri Lanka. And this was supplemented my other research on the Malay text. So now, having I told you the dimension of this, both my concentration on the historical records, archival records, and the originality of the research I produced, it really produced a whole coterie of new knowledge, which became the basis of a what you call study on diaspora Malay literary culture. Today, I just want to tell you, internationally, quite a number of scholars have got interested to pursue where I left off. There's a professor called Professor Ronald Rechi, and then Professor Michael Laffan from Princeton University. I recently met him, and quite a number of other people like Peter Slomanson, a great linguist, and a host of others have been today showing a lot of interest in the areas I have worked on. So I'm sure the world is going to see more and more studies and literature produced on the Sri Lankan community in general and Malays in particular, and that is going to augment and increase our knowledge. And I'm very glad that I was harbinger or the pioneer in this area, which of course I'm very grateful that all these young scholars, people are doing masters and PhDs, and also the new book writers, always acknowledge me as the one of the original finder of these documents. And I'm glad about announcing that. Thank you very much.
That's great. Later in 2003, you moved to University of Brunei as an associate professor until 2016. You wrote a book titled A History of Brunei of Sultan and followed with various other books. In honor of your services, you were awarded a medal by Sultan of Brunei in 2007. I presume that this was a lifetime honor for you. How do you feel about this?
Yes, of course. I think I left Sri Lanka in 1988. I was offered a job in University of Brunei Darussalam, which was just established 3 years before I left. And I joined in the history department. And suddenly I got a break. The Minister of Education at that time, was also Vice Chancellor, came to know about my work on the Sri Lankan Malays and invited me to his office and asked me whether I would be interested to write something about Brunei, about royalty, Brunei history. Because at that time, the University of Brunei Darussalam was just set up, and there was not much interest. Brunei history was not very well developed at that time. Only very few works were existing, and there was nothing on modern history. There were some histories, of course, they were very controversial history, which was always written by controversial people to attack the Brunei royalty and monarchy, as if they were great spenders, etc., etc. That time, the Sultan was His Majesty Sultan Haji Hassan al-Bolkiah, and I joined in 1988 when he still Brunei is under his rule. So I accepted the minister's offer, and there again, I had quite a lot of opportunity offered by the Brunei government to visit various archives in order to collect documentation. You can't write a history of a country from scratch. And Brunei itself did not have a very national archives of that dimension. So I had to go to British National Archives. Of course, Brunei was a British colony, not British colony, a British protected state. And Brunei had relationship with the United States of America. And Brunei had a lot of relationship with the neighboring countries, especially Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong. So I had an opportunity with the state support, His Majesty's support, and with the support of the Brunei History Center. I have been always accompanied by 2 officers of Brunei History Center to visit these archives, not just for my research, but also to identify and collect whatever documents, primary documents, related to Brunei. And I was my chief researcher, and I could read it. And we spent quite a lot of money in microfilming the documents or taking photocopies of them. So that was my major task. So I continuously did it from 1992 up to 1995, or three odd years. I was able to travel and collected enough documents. And then I started writing my book. I couldn't write about the existing Sultan, that is Its Majesty Sultan Haji Hassan Bolkiah. I focused on his father. His father, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin III, first came to the throne in 1950. And he he abdicated his throne in favor of his son in 1967. So there were 27 years of rule I covered. And Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin can be considered as the real founder of Brunei, because before that, Brunei was very backward and it was under British protected rule. And Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin was, I will consider, who started a kind of modern Brunei trend. It was he who introduced the first Brunei constitution, written constitution, of course with the support of the British. So I based my research on that man, and it turned out to be a nice political biography, which in turn turned out to be a very seminal work on the modern Brunei history. So the book was titled Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin and Britain, The Making of Brunei Darussalam, and the book was agreed to be published by the Oxford University Press, their Malaysian branch. And to be kept published in Oxford University Press is a very prestigious event for any scholar, because the book has to be vetted and refereed by very competent scholars. And my book underwent severe scrutiny and process, not only by the scholars, but also by the Brunei government agency, such as the internal security and the ministers involved. All of them read it to comment, because, Brunei is a very budding country and a sultanate. They don't want to be on the wrong step. And I don't want to tell the wrong facts and wrong interpretation. And the book has to meet certain amount of acceptance and acknowledgement. So I was very lucky that my book underwent a whole lot process of scrutiny. And finally, it saw the light of the day. And the final draft was approved and published by the Oxford University Press, which was done in 1995. When it was published, the Sultanate was jubilant. And the book was released in a massive ceremony attended by 3 of the Sultan's daughters. They were the chief guest, and they are the one who released the book. And I was also one of the special guests as the author of the book. And the function was attended by virtually all the ministers of the government and the chief officials. And it was the most glorifying moment in my life. And I have to be specially mentioned here. The book, I got a lot of assistance from one of my good friends called Professor Nicholas Starling, one of the world-class historian who has written more than 70 books in his own lifetime. He was a former professor of history in Auckland University and the dean of the Faculty of Arts, whom I friended. And he is the one who went through the draft of my book. He is an expert himself on the Borneo history. His first Ph.D. done to Cambridge University. His thesis was on the grandfather of the Sultan Omar Ali I spoke about. So we had a lot of connection. So I got a competent guy who could go through that. And also another professor who has worked hard on Brunei called Professor Donald D. Brown too was greatly helpful in shaping my book. So with all this support, that book saw the light of the day, and that set me up as the what you call father of modern Brunei history itself. In fact, I'm considered as Professor Kingsley de Silva of Brunei, or Parnavitana of Brunei, as one of the pioneer Brunei historian. Even today, my book has become a very standard textbook. Everybody who wants to write a book, thesis, or article, or even make speeches, necessarily has to refer to my book. Not only that, as a follow-up of that, I wrote 2-3 other books. One on the Brunei survival, and one on Brunei constitutional history, and then I wrote several articles. So of course, due to that, I got the recognition from the Brunei Palace, and the Brunei Sultan himself has recommended that I should be given a gold medal. And then they recommended me during Sultan's, I think, 65th birthday or something, my birthday also same, to honor him during his birthday, inviting me to a palace and pinned the badge on me. So that was the honor I really still consider. And more honor than that is, till today, Brunei is still considering me as one of their important historian and a contributor to their society.
Wow, that's very impressive. I also see that you discovered the Jawai Malay newspaper called Alamat Langkapuri, which was published in 1869. Can you comment on this discovery?
Yes, I think already I mentioned to that.
Yeah.
That is a very great discovery. I'll tell you why. Already I told you, Malay world basically consists from Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and Singapore, etc. Normally, what would you expect? A Malay newspaper to be published there first. In fact, they published their newspaper called Jawi Peranakan in the year 1873. And many people thought that the first Malay newspaper in the world was Jawi Peranakan, published in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. Whereas my discovery that Alamat Langkapuri was published in Sri Lanka, not in 1873, but 1869, which means 4 years before. What do you think? So that isn't it a big discovery? In other words, Sri Lanka, which is not in the mainstream of the Malay, was able to publish a newspaper in Malay, in Jawi, which indicates the quality of literacy, quality of Malay culture, and the quality of the publication methodology, such as using what you call print mechanism at that time, lithography. Those days, newspapers were not printed like before. They had to be lithographed. And you don't need to produce many copies like that. Maybe they produce about 100 copies for 100 people. So that was a great achievement. In Sri Lanka, this person who published this newspaper called Baba Unu Saldin, he himself is my discovery. Baba Unu Saldin is a very big Malay scholar, Malay alim, and he knew Tamil, he knew English, and he was originally a regiment person, but he resigned his job in order to focus himself on literary activities. And he is the one who became one of the leading lithographers of Sri Lanka. In the book called 20th Century Impressions of Ceylon by Ronald Wright, published in 1905, this Baba Unu Saldin, there is a photographs of him. They have described him as princeps of lithography of Sri Lanka. So you can understand the significance of this particular Malay gentleman, who was the leader in the lithography. And with this skill in lithography, he was able to produce this first Malay world newspaper called Alamat Langkapuri. And he also produced two other newspapers. One was in 1977 called Ajaib Ceylon, which is lost. And another one called Wajah Ceylon, which was published from Sri Lanka in 1995. So, Sri Lanka, he made contribution. Apart from that, he published quite a lot of lithographed Malay Mauluds, Malay Sufi text, in his own biographical text called Faisal Abad. And he also published quite a lot of book on Arabic Tamil, kitabs. And he published work on Malay grammar. So, Sri Lanka, in other words, late 19th century, was a great hub of what you call intellectual literary activities during that British period. So I'm very proud that all these facts came up because of my research. And today, quite a lot of people are interested in Baba Unu Saldin. And even recently there's a book, The Malay Empire under British, by Professor Michael Laffan. The book was just published in the Cambridge, the University Press. And there's a big focus on this gentleman. I myself wrote a very big article in the Journal of Malayan Branch of Royal Asiatic Society on Babaun Sardin. He was born in 1832 and he wafat or passed away in 1906. He was such a great gentleman, and it's not just a man I'm talking about. It is the part of a culture like Sri Lankan Siddhi Lebbe, the great people like ILM Abdul Aziz, the great intellectuals. Babaun Sardin has a very permanent place in the intellectual history of not only of Sri Lanka, not only of Sri Lankan Malay community, but intellectual history of the Malay world, larger world. So that is why today the work on Malay literature, Malay diasporic literature, culture, everything focusing back on Sri Lankan Malay in its starting point. So I'm very happy that this development has taken place.
Okay, so besides your academic achievements, you're also well known for social work activities. At the age of 15, you became the first president of the Malikawate Junior YMM program, and in 1981 became the president of the National Council of the YMMAS program until 1984. You also formed the Federation of Muslim Youth in Sri Lanka. Any thoughts about these first services?
Yes. You see, from young days, I had two uncles in my families, my mother's brothers. One is called SBC Halal Deen, and the other guy called SBC Tasim. This is not a time to describe all of them, but they were very great social servants, and I was actually mentored by them. I was their nephew, and I followed their example. Both of these uncles became the presidents of the Young Men's Muslim Association. During that period, I formed this what I call Junior YMMA. It was not there in existence until it came, and I became the founder president of Junior YMMA. That was my start of the activity. And as I told you, I was also a kind of orator. I used to win a lot of oratorical contests and prizes. So I was able to appear before quite a lot of audience. And through that, I also developed quite a lot of leadership skill. And Maligawata, being such a very backward area of very poorly equipped people with poverty rampant and with social problems like drugs and other ethical issues, it was very important, incumbent upon us to bring some kind of understanding and awareness among the youths of the area to take life seriously and be devoted and be away from all the haram work or illegal work. So my movement, YMMA, I was able to collect around me a host of youth, and they all became very useful youth leaders later. In 1981, of course, I also was elected as the president of the National Council of YMMAs and also Maligawata YMMA. During those years, 1981 and 83 and 84, I was almost like a world leader. At that time, the country, we had very good Sri Lankan Muslim ministers like M.H. Mohammed, A.C.S. Hamid, and I was very friendly with these guys, these people, and they all supported me as an upcoming youth leader. And mind you, at that time, as a YMMA president, I represented quite a lot of events in foreign countries like Dubai, Kuwait, especially in Libya. And Minister A.C.S. Hamid, being a foreign minister, was invited to quite a lot of international conferences, such as one was in Royal Council of Knowledge in Jordan. And it is attended only by the world top leaders and top bankers, Muslim bankers. One day he called me in the night that he's unable to travel to that particular meeting. Can I represent him? And I was taken aback. Oh my God, that is not at my level. I am very young. But he said, doesn't matter. He has identified me, and immediately as a foreign minister could fix my ticket and everything within a day and send me off to Jordan. So I'm just telling you the kind of activity that spurred me by becoming the president. And during this process, I also formed a very important organization called Federation of Assembly of Muslim Youth of Sri Lanka. I was not interested into becoming a simple leader of one organization in my area. I wanted to bring together as many organizations as possible in Sri Lanka, Muslim Youth Organization, and I got full support. In fact, my first inaugural meeting, I had 19 youth organizations attending to form this nuclear organization that was held in one of the five-star hotel. And then the organization was formed, Federal Assembly of Muslim Youth of Sri Lanka, which was very running successfully, and we got a lot of funding. But what happened was, 1985, I had this World Malay Conference in Sri Lanka. And then I got the invitation to attend University Kebangsaan as a visiting professor. So I had an option either to continue my youth activities, my leadership activity, and or to go towards academic activities. So I finally opted for the second one, to become an academic. So I gave up the Federation of Assembly of Muslim Youth of Sri Lanka, but I need to make some comments on this. It was very sad that my organization did not survive for long. I handed it over to one of my good friend to run this organization. I don't want to name him now. He was a very leading lawyer, and he took it over, and he virtually made it a nucleus to form the Muslim Congress. Lead Ashraf. And he got together and used the funds which was collected by me initially to launch this Muslim Youth Congress. Muslim Congress. I won't say Muslim Congress was basically, the funding was done by my organization, but they had enough funds coming. But certainly the Federation of Muslim Youth of Sri Lanka played a very key role in the formation and founding of the political movement of Muslim Congress. Some people believe that had I continued in Sri Lanka, that leadership role would have some or other I might have also have taken up at that stage. So it's God's will that my good friend Ashraf took over the mantle of Muslim leadership, and I was glad that organization that I was able to found was also directly and indirectly contributed to his success. Mr. Ashraf, the former leader of Muslim Congress, and we were very great friends from young days. In fact, he was very happy that I went to Malaysia as a lecturer, and he was trying to emulate me. He wanted to be, in fact, instead of becoming a political leader, he had the ambition of becoming a professor. And he thought that chance I have arrogated from him. Anyway, that is a different story. So, what I would like to say is, my activities with the youth movement was very short-lived. But during that period, I was able to create a large movement within Sri Lanka. I had 4 zones of youth centers, both in the east, south, and the west and central province, headed by leading people of that area. And I set up quite a lot of branches of YMMAs. And I took a lot of social service activities into the areas. And more importantly, during my period as a president of the YMMA, I was able to collect quite a number of scholarships from Libyan government and from private philanthropist donors, and able to sustain nearly 150 scholars in the universities, medical students, lawyers, law students from YMMA scholarship. Quite a number of them are quite famous people now. Some are ambassadors, some are ministers, they have been, and they all know me. And they are still very grateful to me. So at that time, I have contributed quite a lot to education and development of that period. And we set up what you call preschool in Maligavatta, vocational schools, etc. And those things are still functioning. And I'm glad that the activities I left behind is perpetuated within Maligavatta by the National Council of YMMAs. By the Federal Assembly of Muslim Youth of Sri Lanka, unfortunately, had a very bad, early death, and it could not never be revived.
Professor Hussainmiya, you have a very rich resume with your profession, publication, research, and social work. Would you like to add anything that we did not discuss today?
Well, I have, to the best of my ability, I have produced some seminal works, particularly on Sri Lankan Malay and Brunei and Sri Lankan history and more. And I don't think that I have a very huge list of publications, but if you Google my name, initially you will have at least about 10 to 12,000 hits. And I have got very high citation list. Google Scholar would indicate that I have many publications, a lot of people are following. In the Academia EDU, quite a number of people are using my works, and almost every day I get hits of citations. So I won't consider myself such a world-class scholar, but in my own areas, such as the Malay studies, Malay diaspora studies, and Brunei studies, and Brunei history studies, and Sri Lanka history studies, and Sri Lankan Muslim studies, I am able to make some contribution. As much as that, today I am in the United States of America. I've been invited by the Fulbright Foundation, by the State Department, to become a Fulbright professor and a resident scholar in the Religious Studies Department at the Florida International University in Miami. This is a very prestigious scholarship, whereas I had to assist the department, speak to the students, guide them, and conduct lectures, public lectures, and do a lot of communal activities. So, because of my involvement in academia, and because my special interest in cultural religious studies matters, this particular award was given to me. And I have 2 more weeks to finish this. On the October 30th, I'll be leaving to Sri Lanka. And I'm sure I'm going to take back the learning and the exchanges and the educational experience I'm carrying back to be of some worth to the students and the staff of mine. Plus, I would like to devote the rest of my life as much as possible to create a coterie of scholars, or as much as possible help the Sri Lankan scholars, especially the Muslim scholars, to complete their masters and PhDs. And it is a very great need in Sri Lanka that we need to produce an intellectual class. A quite number of our scholars have passed away, namely Professor M.A.M. Shukri and Professor Maru from America. And quite a number of them are now in their old age. But we need young scholars interested in humanities and social sciences. Of course, we have got very good scholars. There are IT specialists there, Muslims. I'm not decrying them. We have a lot of doctors. I'm not denying that. And quite a number of engineers, scientists, chemists, biologists, pharmacists, pharmacologists. But what I'm interested in, persons who think liberally. Not that doctors don't think liberally. I'm talking people who study history, culture, literature, arts, anthropology, sociology, education, philosophy. The old gamut of studies. That kind of studies is getting much lesser and less popular because it doesn't produce much money. Not like becoming a doctor or an IT specialist. You can't easily emigrate to America or any other country. But it has its value. It is through such people, your society's culture, your society's heritage, your society's pride can be perpetuated. As Muslims, as Sri Lankan Muslims, you have a deep culture, deep history, a very long-standing achievement, and that has to be brought out. And there is lot of work to be done on Sri Lankan Muslim history as such. So I'm looking forward to receive and meet people who will be interested. Already I have started to indirectly guide them, quite a number of scholars who go to International Islamic University, Turkish University, other universities. I've helped them with their thesis topic, the material, where they can find. And basically, I am imparting my own experience and knowledge in how to collect material, how to go about, what languages they have to learn, and how much writing they should do. And they should emerge as world-class scholars. And that is my great wish. I wish that my wish will be fruitful and I will get some very interested, concerned, and motivated and devoted students, especially among the Muslims in Sri Lanka.
Inshallah. Lastly, what's some advice that you would give to our youth?
Well, today's youth are facing many challenges. Most importantly, I cannot overemphasize the value of education. Today, you don't confine your education just at the basic degree level. You will have to go far above. World has become very competitive. Minimum, you must get your masters and, if possible, PhDs, and try to be as competitive as possible. At the same time, find out areas in which you will be able to use your knowledge, not just for education, but to make themselves as basis of earning your livelihood. Because it is pointless accumulating degrees and knowledge without being able to obtain jobs. So my advice is very universal. It's not just to our youth as thing. People sometimes has to be born lucky, work luck. Sometimes things come to you, sometimes you have to go after it. But whatever happens, please be honest, be direct, and just don't look after yourself only. As youths, we have some responsibility towards our own community and the nation. I always say, don't become selfish youths. Be educated, be learned, be enterprising, be entrepreneurial, be mudalalis, be capitalist, find organizations, find establishments, find workshops, give jobs to others, and at the same time, be good philanthropist. Our brothers, our suffering masses need support from able people like you. Thank you.
Thank you for the word of advice. I believe we have covered the most important areas of success of Professor Hussainmiya today in this session. Thank you, Professor Hussainmiya, for your participation in this program. We wish you the best for your future.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity TASMiNA has provided. I think they are doing a great job. They are collecting some people. In fact, by interviewing me, you have not got great things. We are not great men. We are not Nobel laureates. We are just very ordinary people at the lower rung of the intellectual world. But at least this kind of interview, if it can be recorded for progeny, one day would be able to help people who are coming, say in future, say 20, 30, 40 years time, to understand the milieu in which we people lived. Baby boomers who were born after 1950, 1940 war, and what achievements or what the maximum level they could go and how did the world treat them. So I think this is also going to be a form of indirect oral history, and I'm glad that TASMiNA has thought both ways. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh.